"I'll leave you unable to walk," he whispered coldly, and it sounded like more than just desire. She was a virgin, not only in body, but in soul, and had never been truly seen by anyone. When love finally arrived, it was already too late to save what was left of her. If you enjoy stories of love and romance, watch until the end, you won't regret it. Subscribe to this channel and leave a comment telling us where you're listening to this beautiful story from. Now on with the story. The mansion stood imposing atop St. Charles Hill in New Orleans, shrouded by dense vegetation and surrounded by a silence that seemed not to belong to that chaotic city. Beatrice felt a chill run down her spine as soon as she passed through the rusted iron gate, carrying her worn-out backpack with her scuffed sneakers and her eyes fixed on the cobblestone ground. She was 22, but the weight on her shoulders betrayed a life without a surname. Raised at the Our Lady of Angels Institute on the outskirts of Chalmette, Beatrice had known only the rigor of the nuns, the silent punishments, and the prayers that sounded like threats. She had never known love in any of its forms, not as affection, not as desire, not as a choice. Her virginity was not merely physical. It was an existential state, an absence of life that she carried like a cross. The job as a housekeeper in the Hawthorne mansion had emerged as a twofold opportunity. On one hand, it meant sustenance after the forced adulthood that had expelled her from the orphanage. On the other, it represented a chance to investigate what consumed her from within. The mystery surrounding Marta, the only orphanage employee who had shown her any affection during her adolescence, before disappearing without a trace. On the eve of her disappearance, Marta had left a note hidden inside an old Bible that Beatrice used to read. "He said I would never walk again. If you ever read this, run." The note bore the Hawthorne family crest in the bottom corner, embossed. It was to this house, this family, that Beatrice was now going. She told no one. Not that she knew the name. Not that she was looking for answers. Silence had been her shield for as long as she could remember. Thomas Hawthorne was a name shrouded in mystery in the New Orleans newspapers, heir to a fortune built in the real estate market. With companies spread along the Gulf Coast, he had lived out of the spotlight for nearly a decade. The rumors were many, that he had been committed after a nervous breakdown, that he had been responsible for the accident that left a woman in a vegetative state, that he lived as a recluse because he couldn't trust his own impulses. At 39, Thomas was more legend than man, and that was exactly how Beatrice found him when she was led to the mansion's library for the final interview. A tall man, with light brown skin, black hair with silver strands at the temples, eyes of such a dark brown they seemed black, and a posture that indicated he was always containing something within himself. He did not smile. He did not extend his hand. He merely looked her up and down as if appraising merchandise, and said in a deep, raspy voice, "Here no one enters where they are not called. If they do, they don't walk out." The words landed like stones in Beatrice's stomach. She couldn't tell if it was a threat, a warning, or some kind of test. She swallowed hard, holding his gaze with a firmness she didn't know she possessed, and replied, "I understand perfectly, sir. Respect is the foundation of any job." A shadow of surprise crossed his face. Perhaps he expected her to cower. Perhaps he recognized something familiar in her. After a silence that seemed to last an eternity, he nodded and withdrew, leaving her with the older housekeeper, Regina, a 60-year-old woman who had worked for the family for decades and would be responsible for guiding her in the first few days. That night, settled into a simple but comfortable room in the staff wing, Beatrice had a dream about Marta. She was dressed in white, pale, calling her to a room at the end of a dark corridor. When she woke up, a note had been slipped under her door. The handwriting was strong, masculine. "You smell of wild jasmine, a flower that grows where no one planted it." Beatrice felt her heart race. She stored the note in the wooden box where she kept her few precious belongings. She didn't know whether to feel threatened or intrigued. A part of her wanted to run. The other, stronger part wanted answers. The following days were marked by a strange, almost surreal routine. The mansion, despite its grandeur, seemed dead. Thomas maintained strict rules: coffee at 7, lunch at 1, dinner at 8. All meals were served punctually, even though he often didn't show up to eat them. The east wing of the house was completely forbidden. Not even to clean, Regina had warned, with a look that said more than her words. Beatrice began to notice disturbing details. The paintings turned to face the wall in some corridors, a perpetually locked room from which a strong smell of paint and herbs emanated. The whispers that echoed through the old walls when everyone seemed to be asleep. Thomas was an absent, and at the same time omnipresent employer. Whole days would pass without her seeing him, but she felt his presence in every corner of the house, as if the old furniture itself breathed to his rhythm. When they did cross paths, it was always tense. He would look at her as if trying to decipher a code. She would hold his gaze, but her heart pounded so hard she feared he could hear it. One afternoon, while arranging a bookshelf in the library, a task Regina had delegated to her with visible reluctance, Beatrice found a carved wooden box hidden behind a row of encyclopedias. Curiosity was stronger than caution. Inside there was a black-covered notebook, old and worn. Opening it, she found entries from different women. Unsent letters, confessions, notes. All had apparently worked in the house at different times. Some wrote like lovers, others in desperation, and all of them mentioned a phrase that chilled her blood. He said I would never walk again. But it was for love. Beatrice almost dropped the notebook when she heard approaching footsteps. She quickly put it back in its place and pretended to organize the books. Regina appeared at the door, her gaze suspicious. "Mr. Hawthorne wants to see you in his office now." Beatrice's heart sped up. Had she been caught? She followed Regina through the dark corridors to the office, an imposing room overlooking the back of the property, where an abandoned swimming pool reflected the cloudy sky of that late afternoon. Thomas was standing by the window, watching the storm that was forming. Without turning around, he said, "Regina, you may leave." When they were alone, the silence was as heavy as lead. Beatrice stood straight, breathing with difficulty, waiting to be accused, fired, perhaps even threatened. But when he finally turned, his gaze was not one of anger. It was something more complex, almost vulnerable. "Do you play the piano?" he asked, taking her completely by surprise. "No, sir. At the orphanage, we didn't have access to instruments." He nodded as if he had expected that answer. There was a grand piano in the music room. "It's been covered for years." "My mother used to play." Beatrice didn't understand where this conversation was going. "I heard you humming earlier today while you were organizing the pantry," he continued. "You have a beautiful voice, sad but beautiful." "Thank you, sir," she replied, flustered. "Don't call me sir when we're alone. It makes me feel like my father." "And I'm not like him," Thomas said, taking a few steps closer. "Would you like to learn to play?" The proposal caught her off guard. Why would he offer something like this to a simple employee he barely knew? I don't know if that would be appropriate." Thomas managed something that could be called a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "In this house, I define what is appropriate." He paused. "Think about it. The piano is in the room in the east corridor. I'm offering you permission to use that space if you wish. Only that one, the east corridor, the forbidden area." Beatrice felt there was more to this offer than met the eye. "Why are you offering me this?" Thomas seemed not to expect the direct question. His eyes darkened. "Perhaps I'm bored. Perhaps I want to hear music in this house again after so long. Or perhaps—" He moved closer until he was just a step away from her. "Perhaps I'm curious to see how far your courage goes." The air between them grew heavy. Beatrice could feel the heat emanating from his body. The scent of his expensive cologne mixed with something more primitive, more human. "I'm just naturally curious," she replied, not breaking eye contact. "Don't mistake that for courage." He tilted his head slightly to the side, studying her. "Curiosity has killed many people." "Beatrice, and saved many others," she retorted, surprising herself with her own audacity. Lightning illuminated the office, followed by the roar of thunder. The rain began to fall violently outside. For a moment, the world seemed to exist only within that room, only between the two of them. "You may leave," he said finally, moving away again. "And Beatrice, be careful what you look for in this house. You might just find it." The next night, Beatrice couldn't sleep. The conversation with Thomas, the mysterious notebook, the forbidden corridor, it all swirled in her mind. After hours of tossing and turning, she made a decision. She got up silently, put on a robe over her nightgown, and went out into the dark hallway. The mansion at night was a labyrinth of shadows and whispers. The old floorboards creaked under her feet, despite the care with which she moved. Beatrice knew the way to the east wing. She had memorized the house's layout from the first day as a precaution. When she reached the door that separated the two wings, she hesitated. Regina had said it was always locked, but when she turned the knob to her surprise, the door opened without resistance. The east wing was different from the rest of the house. While the mansion was decorated with a sober, traditional luxury, this wing seemed frozen in time. Old wallpaper, furniture covered with white sheets, a thin layer of dust on everything despite the house having a cleaning staff. It was as if this space was deliberately maintained as a mausoleum. The piano room was not hard to find. It was large, with floor-to-ceiling windows covered by heavy red velvet curtains. The grand piano stood in the center, covered by a white sheet that Beatrice carefully removed. The instrument was magnificent, a gleaming black that contrasted with the yellowed ivory of the keys. Beatrice sat on the bench and gently touched a key. The sound reverberated through the room, crystalline and perfect, as if the piano had been tuned recently, despite apparently not being used for years. She ran her fingers over the keys, producing a simple, hesitant melody she had learned from Marta, long ago. "I knew you would come." Thomas's voice made her jump up abruptly, knocking over the bench. He was standing in the doorway, wearing only a pair of pajama pants, his bare torso revealing a defined body, marked by a large scar that ran from his chest to his abdomen. "I'm sorry. I was just—" "Don't lie," he interrupted, approaching slowly. "You came because you wanted to, because you needed to know." He stopped a few feet from her. "What exactly do you expect to find, Beatrice? What do you think exists in this house?" Her heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would escape her chest. "I'm looking for someone, a woman named Marta. She worked at the orphanage where I grew up and disappeared a few years ago. The last trace of her leads to this house." She hadn't planned to be so direct, but something about the situation, the darkness of the night, the proximity of this man, made the truth simply slip out. Thomas stood motionless for a few seconds, his face an impenetrable mask. Then, to her surprise, he sighed and sat down at the piano. Marta Silva, dark hair, green eyes, a small scar above her right eyebrow. Beatrice felt the blood run cold in her veins. "You knew her. She worked here for 6 months, 7 years ago. She was efficient, discreet." He played a few notes on the piano, a melancholic melody that seemed to flow naturally from his fingers. "And a liar. What happened to her?" Beatrice's voice came out weaker than she intended. Thomas continued to play without looking at her. "Why is she important to you?" "She was the only person at the orphanage who treated me like a human being, who taught me that I had value beyond being obedient and invisible." Beatrice swallowed hard, and before she disappeared, she left a note. "A warning, with your family's crest on it." Thomas's hands stopped on the keys. The silence that followed was oppressive. "What warning?" He said I would never walk again. "If you ever read this, run." Thomas closed his eyes as if in pain. When he reopened them, there was something dark and profound in his gaze. "Marta didn't disappear, Beatrice. She ran away, and for good reason." He stood up and approached her again. "Just as you should do now." Beatrice felt a chill run down her spine, but she didn't back away. "I'm not leaving without answers. Even if the answers might destroy you. Even if—" He slowly raised his hand and for the first time touched her face with his fingertips. "Even if you might end up like all the others." His touch was warm, almost reverent, and it awakened something inside her she didn't know existed, a deep desire mixed with fear. "What happened to the others?" Thomas let his hand fall and took a step back. "Go to sleep, Beatrice, and tomorrow resign. Leave this place while you still can." He turned and walked to the door, but before leaving he stopped and said, "Without turning around, and lock your door tonight." In the following days, Beatrice intensified her search for answers. While carrying out her duties during the day, she used every free moment to explore the house systematically, following an instinct she couldn't explain. Her investigation became methodical. She mentally catalogued every room visited, every drawer checked, every paper found. During her nightly explorations, she discovered a small room hidden behind a sliding bookshelf in the library, a space that was clearly not on the official floor plans of the house. Inside, she found dozens of folders organized chronologically, all with female names. Some contained only hiring and termination documents. Others, much thicker, included photographs, medical notes and, most disturbingly, newspaper clippings about accidents or disappearances. In one of these folders, she found Marta's file, accompanied by a medical report detailing a domestic accident that had resulted in trauma to the lumbar, spine with temporary impairment of mobility, in the lower limbs. The document was on the letterhead of St. Luke's Medical Center, a high-end private institution in New Orleans, and was signed by Helena Hawthorne, MD neurologist. Helena, Beatrice murmured to herself. No one had mentioned a doctor in the family. Regina occasionally spoke of Dr. Helena, but always in a reverent and fearful tone, as if mentioning a mythical figure. The final piece of this puzzle came when Beatrice found, hidden at the back of a drawer in the room that had been Marta's, now used for storage, a small music box. Inside it, along with a soft, melancholic melody, was an old photograph. A young woman looking very much like Beatrice, holding a baby in her arms. On the back, handwritten, "So you never forget who you really are. With love, your mother." Beatrice felt the world spin. The resemblance was undeniable. The same almond-shaped eyes, the same facial structure, the same determined chin. The woman in the photo was Marta, and the baby. "You shouldn't be here." The cool, controlled female voice made Beatrice turn sharply. In the doorway stood an elegant woman of about 50, her grey hair impeccably styled in a bun, wearing a grey suit and thin-framed glasses. Her features were similar to Thomas's, but where he had restrained intensity, she had calculated coldness. "Dr. Helena, I presume," Beatrice said, still holding the photo. A humorless smile curved the woman's lips. "And you must be my brother's new distraction." "Beatrice, isn't it? The resemblance is remarkable." She entered the room and held out her hand. "The photo, please." Beatrice hesitated, but something in the woman's gaze made her comply. Helena examined the image with an unreadable expression. "You're her daughter." It wasn't a question. "It seems so," Beatrice replied, feeling a mix of shock and anger rising within her. "What did you do to her? What did all of you do?" Helena handed back the photo with a casual gesture, as if it were of no importance. Nothing she didn't ask for. Marta Silva was an opportunist. She took advantage of my brother's emotional vulnerability after our mother's death. She tried to manipulate him. When things didn't go as she planned, she paused deliberately. There were consequences. What kind of consequences leave someone unable to walk? Helena adjusted her glasses, the only sign that she might not be as calm as she appeared. Accidents happen, especially to people who meddle where they shouldn't, as you are doing now. She took a step forward, invading Beatrice's personal space. "My brother is a sick man, Beatrice. It has been my responsibility to protect him from himself since his breakdown, and to protect other people from him." "What breakdown?" "Thomas has always had obsessive tendencies. After our father died, it got worse. He would fixate on certain women, convince himself they were his salvation, that they could cure him. And when they inevitably disappointed him," she made a vague gesture with her hand, "he would lose control." Beatrice felt a chill. "Is that why you're here now? To protect me from him?" Helena's smile became almost predatory. "No, dear. I'm here to protect him from you." She took an envelope from her blazer pocket and held it out. "There's enough money in here for you to start a new life, anywhere far from New Orleans. I suggest Chicago or maybe the West Coast. Use a new name. Never look back." Beatrice looked at the envelope but didn't take it. "And if I don't accept?" "Then you're not as smart as your mother. She at least had the good sense to run when she had the chance." Helena placed the envelope on a nearby table. "Think it over. You have until tomorrow." When Helena left, Beatrice collapsed into the nearest chair, Marta's photo still in her hands. Everything was starting to make sense. The sudden disappearance, the warning note, the fact that she had never returned to the orphanage to see her. Marta was her mother, and she had fled from something or someone in this house. But why leave her behind? Lost in thought, Beatrice didn't notice Thomas's approach until he was in the doorway, his face a mask of restrained emotions. Helena was here. It wasn't a question. Beatrice nodded, showing him the photo. "Did you know?" Thomas came in and sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly looking exhausted. "I suspected from the moment you walked through that gate. You have her eyes. And something else." a strength that reminded me of her immediately. Why did she abandon me? The pain in Beatrice's voice was palpable. Thomas sighed deeply. Because I forced her to. Because I threatened to take you from her permanently, if she didn't disappear from my life. He raised his gaze to meet hers. Because I was sick, Beatrice. In a way that even I didn't understand at the time. Helena said you have obsessive tendencies. A bitter laugh escaped his lips. Helena says many things. Some true, others convenient for keeping her in control. So what's the truth? What happened to my mother? Thomas stood and walked to the window, looking out at the night sky. I loved her. In my own twisted, selfish way, I truly loved her. And when I found out she was pregnant, something broke inside me. The idea of sharing her with someone else. He closed his eyes briefly. I lost control. There was a fight. She fell down the stairs. For 3 months, the doctors didn't know if she would walk again. Beatrice felt nauseous. Was it an accident? It was my fault. Thomas turned to her. I didn't push her intentionally, but I pursued her, cornered her. The result is the same. And then you sent her away, without me. She wanted to take you, she begged. But he swallowed hard. I told her that if she tried, I would do something worse, that I would use my influence to take you from her legally, that I would have her committed as mentally unstable. At the time, I would have done it. I believed I was protecting what was mine. I wasn't yours. Beatrice's voice rose. I was a child, not property. I know that now. It took years of therapy, medication, and confronting my own demons to understand what I did, the kind of monster I was. He took a step toward her. After Marta left, Helena took control. She convinced me to undergo an experimental treatment of hers. For years I lived in a drug-induced stupor. It was only 2 years ago that I started to break free, to reduce the doses, to think clearly again. And what does this have to do with me? Why did you hire me? Thomas hesitated. I didn't hire you. Helena did, part of her ongoing game of control. She found out that Marta had made contact with the orphanage, that she might be trying to find you. So Helena acted first. As a test, Beatrice felt manipulated, used, as a trap. For both of us. He moved closer until he was just a step away. She wanted to see if I would fall into the same obsessive pattern upon seeing Marta's daughter. If I would revert to the dangerous man I was. And she wanted you to discover the truth about me, about what I did, so you would be horrified and run, taking any connection to Marta far away for good. And you? Beatrice stood up, facing him. What did you want? Redemption. The word came out like a sigh, a chance to do something right after so many wrongs. When I realized who you were, I wanted to protect you. From Helena, from myself. That's why I've been warning you to leave. But you've also been watching me, following me, leaving notes. Why? Thomas closed his eyes briefly, as if fighting against himself. Because there's something in you that awakens the worst and the best in me. Because when I see you, I see the chance for a different life, to be someone better. He slowly raised his hand and touched her face. And because, God forgive me, I can't help but be drawn to you in a way I know I shouldn't. His touch sent waves of heat through Beatrice's body. She knew she should pull back, that everything about this situation was wrong on so many levels. This man had hurt her mother, had been the reason for her abandonment. And yet there was something in him, a raw vulnerability, a brutal honesty that stopped her from simply hating him. You should hate me, he said, as if reading her thoughts. Maybe I should, she replied, not pulling away. But hate is a luxury I've never had time to cultivate. I grew up too empty for it. What do you want, Beatrice? Money, revenge, justice? I want the truth, all of it, and I want to find my mother. Thomas nodded slowly. Then that's what you'll have. Tomorrow I'll show you everything. The records, the contacts, the clues I have about where Marta might be now. And then, he paused, then you decide whether you want to leave or stay. He moved away, heading for the door. Before leaving, however, he turned one last time. Lock your door tonight, Beatrice, but not out of fear of me. Helena has realized she's losing control of the situation, and she doesn't accept losing anything. When he left, Beatrice sat down again, her mother's photo still in her hands, her heart beating erratically. In less than a day, her life had been turned upside down. She had not only discovered her origins, but had found herself entangled in a web of obsession, control, and secrets that stretched back decades. and at the center of it all was a man she simultaneously feared and, against all logic, desired. The night seemed endless. Beatrice couldn't sleep, tossing and turning in bed as her mind processed the day's revelations. The photo of Marta, her mother, lay on the nightstand, illuminated by the moonlight filtering through the window. It was strange to look at that face and see her own reflection, to recognize features she had always thought were unique as an inheritance, a connection to someone who existed beyond the emptiness she had always felt. Around 5 in the morning, she gave up trying to sleep. She dressed and went out silently into the garden, hoping the cool pre-dawn air would clear her thoughts. The sky was beginning to take on shades of pink and orange, and the gentle breeze carried the distant smell of the sea, mixed with the perfume of the gardenias, growing in the carefully tended flower beds. "You have insomnia too?" Thomas's voice startled her. He was sitting on a stone bench, partially hidden by an old crepe myrtle, wearing jeans and a simple t-shirt, the most casual clothes she had ever seen him in. He looked as though he had spent the night there, judging by his red eyes and disheveled hair. "I don't think anyone would sleep well after what I've discovered," Beatrice replied, hesitating before approaching and sitting on the same bench, keeping a safe distance. "Fair enough," he nodded, looking at the horizon. "I've been thinking about promises I've made and broken, about what it really means to do the right thing. And did you come to any conclusions?" "Yes, that there isn't always a right thing to do. Sometimes there are only different mistakes." He turned to her. "I promised to show you everything today. I will keep my word. But before that happens, I need you to understand something. Helena is not just my sister and my doctor. She is the legal trustee of my fortune, the company, everything. Because of your breakdown," Thomas grimaced. "That's how she classified what happened. In reality, I suffered a psychotic break after years of untreated obsessive behavior, aggravated by childhood trauma and the turbulent relationship with Marta. I was committed to a private clinic for 2 years, then lived under Helena's constant supervision. Legally, I am classified as partially incapacitated. But you seem lucid now." "I am. I've been gradually reducing the medication against her orders. For years, I lived in a state of numbness that prevented me from feeling anything intensely. It was like being dead while alive," his dark eyes fixed on hers. "Until you arrived." Beatrice felt a shiver run down her spine. There was something dangerously seductive in the way he looked at her, as if she were simultaneously his salvation and his ruin. "What does Helena gain by keeping you like this?" "Power, control, money," he shrugged. "The Hawthorne Corporation is worth billions. As long as I'm considered too unstable to manage it, she remains in charge. And she's developed a taste for power over the years." A disturbing thought occurred to Beatrice. "Do you think she might have kept you sick on purpose?" Thomas's bitter smile confirmed the suspicion before he even answered. "I'm sure of it. The medications she prescribed weren't just to stabilize my condition, but to keep me submissive. I discovered this when I started researching on my own, reducing the doses without her knowledge. Why don't you report her to the medical board? Or the police? With what proof? She's respected, has connections everywhere, and legally I'm still considered unstable. My word against hers." He ran a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "Besides, there are things I did in the past, during my episodes, that I don't want to come to light. Things she knows and uses as a veiled threat." The sun was now rising on the horizon, painting the sky an intense red. Beatrice watched Thomas's profile against this light, the hard lines of his face softened by the vulnerability of the moment. "I'll help you find Marta," he said after a long silence. "And then you decide what you want to do. If you prefer to never see me again, I'll understand." Something in the way he said it, the resignation, the barely contained pain, touched Beatrice deeply. Despite everything she knew about him, everything he had done, she couldn't see him simply as a monster. There was complexity there, layers of pain and regret that she somehow recognized. "Let's go inside," she said, standing up. "I want to see what you have on my mother." Thomas led her through the silent corridors of the mansion to a room in the basement she had never noticed before. A private archive, protected by a heavy metal door with a digital lock. He typed in a code and the door opened with a soft click. "Helena doesn't know I have access to this place," he explained, turning on the lights. I think she believes I forgot the code during my treatment. The room was surprisingly modern compared to the rest of the house. White walls, steel file cabinets, a state-of-the-art computer on a glass desk. Thomas sat down and invited Beatrice to do the same. I started gathering information on Marta about a year ago. When I finally had enough mental clarity to understand what I had done, he opened a folder on the computer. It wasn't easy. Helena made sure to erase many traces, but I committed certain excesses in the past that have turned out to be useful now. What kind of excesses? He hesitated. I used to monitor the women I obsessed over. Cameras, wiretaps, private investigators. It was part of my illness. The need for control, to know everything. Beatrice felt a chill but remained steady. And you did that with my mother. Yes, and that's why I know that after leaving you at the orphanage, she went to Richmond, Virginia. She changed her name to Marina Santos, got a job as a receptionist at a physical therapy clinic. Ironic, considering her injury history. He opened a photo on the screen. An older woman, her hair short now but unmistakably Marta, leaving a commercial building. When was this picture taken? 6 years ago. I continued to track her for a while, then he looked embarrassed. Helena found out what I was doing and increased the medication. I lost contact for almost 5 years. And recently, Thomas typed something else and a new image appeared. Marta, now with graying hair in front of a small shop with a sign that read, New Dawn Bookstore. This is from 3 months ago. She moved to Black Creek, Virginia. Apparently she owns a small bookstore specializing in women's literature and rare books. She lives alone, has few friends, a quiet life. Beatrice felt tears well up in her eyes as she saw her mother, alive and seemingly well. She tried to find me at the orphanage. Yes, from what I could gather, she started making discreet inquiries about a year ago, but Helena intercepted the communication somehow. That's when she decided to bring you here. As a pawn in your game. The bitterness in Beatrice's voice was palpable. I'm so sorry, Thomas's voice cracked. I know there's no way to undo what I did to both of you, that I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm trying to do the right thing now, even if it's too late. He opened a drawer and took out a thick envelope. Here's everything. Her current address, phone number, information about the bookstore. And this, he held out a small object, a key on a chain with a hummingbird charm. It's the symbol of her bookstore. The key is to an apartment I bought in Black Creek. If you want to go there, you have a place to stay. Beatrice took the envelope and the key, feeling the weight of everything they represented. Why are you doing this? Out of guilt, partly. Thomas looked at her directly without wavering. But also because in some twisted way, you brought light back into this house. Because against all that is sensible, I've felt alive again since you arrived. And because, he hesitated, because I think you deserve the chance to know your mother, to have the family I helped destroy. Before Beatrice could respond, they heard footsteps approaching in the hallway. Thomas quickly closed the files and shut down the computer. Helena, he muttered, she shouldn't be here this early. What do we do? Beatrice whispered, her heart racing. There's an exit through the back. Go to your room, act normal. Hide the envelope. We'll talk later. Beatrice nodded and quickly left through the secondary door Thomas indicated, finding herself in a service corridor that led to the kitchen area. She managed to reach her room without being seen, hid the envelope inside her mattress and tried to calm her breathing. Minutes later, she heard raised voices coming from downstairs. She crept silently to the staircase and could make out Helena and Thomas arguing. Completely irresponsible. You're in no condition to make decisions, Thomas. That's why I'm your legal trustee. I'm not the same man I was 7 years ago, Helena. I'm lucid, stable. I've been gradually reducing the medication, and I feel better than ever. Helena's voice became dangerously low. You've been disobeying your prescriptions? Do you have any idea how dangerous that is? I have an idea of how convenient it is for you to keep me drugged and under control. How's the company, Helena? How many millions did you embezzle this year? The sound of a slap echoed through the walls. Beatrice covered her mouth to keep from making a sound. You're pathetic. Helena's voice was laden with contempt. You think that girl cares about you? She's just like her mother, an opportunist who saw a rich, vulnerable man and decided to take advantage. Don't talk about her like that. You're already obsessed again. Always the same pattern, the same sick behavior. You think you're better, but you're getting worse. Soon you'll start following her, controlling her, and eventually you'll hurt her, just like you did with all the others. No, this time is different. I am different. That's what you always say. Helena's tone was almost maternal now, manipulative. Remember what happened with Louisa. How you swore you loved her, that it would be different, that you were cured. And in the end, she ended up in that wheelchair. That was an accident. I never meant to, but it happened. Because you're sick, Thomas. You need help, Control. You need me. The silence that followed was oppressive. Beatrice could almost feel Thomas's internal struggle, the way Helena's words pierced his carefully constructed defenses. I want you to fire her. Helena's voice was firm now. Today. And we're increasing your medication. It's time for you to start taking proper care of yourself again. Beatrice retreated silently, returning to her room. She felt nauseous. Helena was clearly manipulative, using Thomas's past and her own medical authority to control him. But there was also truth in her words. Thomas had a history of obsessive behavior, of hurting women. He had actually hurt someone named Louisa to the point of putting her in a wheelchair, the same threat he had made to her mother. The rest of the day passed in a suffocating tension. Beatrice carried out her duties automatically, avoiding both Helena and Thomas. In the evening, she retired to her room early but couldn't sleep. Her mind worked furiously, analyzing options, weighing risks. Around midnight, she heard a light knock on the door. Her heart leaped. She opened it a crack, expecting to see Thomas, but it was Regina, her face tense. "May I come in?" the housekeeper asked in a low voice. Beatrice nodded, opening the door wider. Regina entered quickly and closed it behind her. "We don't have much time," she said, her voice urgent. "Dr. Helena has given orders for you to be fired tomorrow." "But there's more." She hesitated. "I overheard a conversation between her and Dr. Evans, Mr. Thomas's private psychiatrist. They're planning to have him committed again, involuntarily." Beatrice felt her blood run cold. "Can she do that?" "She's his legal trustee. And she has 2 doctors willing to attest that he's a danger to himself and others." Regina seemed genuinely concerned. "Mr. Thomas has been getting better these last few years. Reducing the medication, becoming more himself. But that means he's slipping from Dr. Helena's control. Why are you telling me this? Why do you care?" Regina looked at her intently. "I've worked here for 30 years. I watched Mr. Thomas grow up. I saw what his father did to him, how he broke him inside. I saw how Helena took advantage of that brokenness for her own ends." She sighed deeply. "And I knew your mother. Marta was a good person. What happened to her? It wasn't fair." "You knew she was my mother?" "I suspected from the moment I saw you." "The resemblance is unmistakable." Regina took Beatrice's hand in hers. "You need to leave tonight, and you should take Mr. Thomas with you." The suggestion caught Beatrice by surprise. "Why? After everything he's done?" "Because he's trying to change. Because he deserves a chance to redeem himself. And because," Regina hesitated, "because if he's committed again under Helena's care, this time he won't survive." Before Beatrice could answer, they heard the sound of glass shattering downstairs, followed by shouts. Regina turned pale. "It's already started. Go to him." "There's a passage through the kitchen that leads to the back garage. The key to the black Jeep is hanging on the hook marked with red tape." She took a small bottle of pills from her pocket. "These are his meds, the ones he actually needs, not the ones Helena prescribes. Enough for a few weeks." Beatrice took the bottle, her mind in a whirl. "Regina, why now? Why did you never do anything before?" The elderly housekeeper's gaze was a mixture of shame and determination. "Because I was always afraid. Because I have a granddaughter who depends on the financial help I receive from Dr. Helena for medical treatments." Her eyes filled with tears. "But there are limits to what we can endure in the name of fear. Tonight I reached mine." With those words, Regina quickly left the room. Beatrice stood paralyzed for a few moments, her heart pounding. Then, on impulse, she grabbed her backpack, stuffed in a few clothes, the envelope with the information about Marta, and the bottle of medication. She put on her sneakers and crept out into the hallway. The mansion was in turmoil. Raised voices came from the main office. Beatrice went down the stairs silently, keeping to the shadows. As she passed the corridor leading to the office, she glimpsed a scene through the ajar door that chilled her to the bone. Thomas on the floor, with 2 strong men holding him by the arms while Helena prepared a syringe. "It's for your own good." "Brother?" she was saying, her voice falsely sweet. You know you need this. No. Thomas struggled, but he was clearly at a disadvantage. You've been poisoning me for years, Helena. I won't let you continue. Unfortunately, it's not your decision. Helena approached with the syringe. When you wake up, you'll be at the clinic, where we can take proper care of you. Beatrice knew she should keep going, find the exit, as Regina had instructed. It was the sensible thing to do, but something inside her refused to abandon Thomas to that fate. Without a second thought, she entered the office. Stop! Everyone turned to her, surprised. Helena was the first to recover. The heroine arrives. Perfect. Now we can resolve everything at once, and she gestured, and one of the men let go of Thomas, advancing toward Beatrice. Don't you touch her! Thomas used the moment of distraction to break free from the second man with a violent shove, sending him to the floor. What followed was chaos. Beatrice dodged the man advancing on her, knocking over a coffee table to block his path. Thomas engaged in a physical struggle with the second man, while Helena shouted orders, still holding the syringe. Thomas! Beatrice called, pointing to the side door that led to the service corridor. He understood immediately. With one last push that sent his opponent against the wall, he ran in the indicated direction. Beatrice followed, closing and locking the door behind them. This way, she panted, leading the way through the corridors she knew well after weeks of working in the house. They reached the kitchen without being intercepted, but they could hear the commotion spreading through the mansion, shouts, slamming doors, heavy footsteps. Regina said there's a passage to the garage, Beatrice said, searching frantically. Thomas moved a pantry shelf, revealing a discreet door. This house was built during the Cold War. My grandfather was paranoid. They went through the door, down a short flight of stairs that led directly to the back garage. As promised, the black Jeep was there, the keys on the hook marked with red tape. Do you know how to drive? Thomas asked, his breathing still ragged. Yes, Beatrice replied, grabbing the keys. I learned at the orphanage. One of the nuns taught me secretly. She thought it was a useful skill. They got into the car, Beatrice at the wheel. As the engine roared to life, they heard the garage door being forced open. In the rearview mirror, they saw Helena and the two men. Go, Thomas shouted. Beatrice accelerated, lurching out of the garage and up the ramp leading to the outer gate. To her surprise, the gate began to open automatically. Regina, Thomas murmured, realizing what was happening. She must have triggered the control. They passed through the gate and onto the winding road that descended the hill, leaving the mansion behind. Beatrice drove with concentration, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were white. Only after several miles, when they were sure they weren't being followed, did Beatrice allow herself to breathe more calmly. She glanced at Thomas, who was leaning back in his seat, looking exhausted. Are you okay? She asked. He gave a weak, humorless laugh. Define okay. I've just been drugged by my sister, nearly committed against my will, and I'm on the run with the daughter of a woman I deeply hurt in the past. He closed his eyes. But I'm free. So maybe, yes, I'm okay. Where are we going? Thomas turned his face to her. In the darkness of the car, illuminated only by the dashboard lights and occasional streetlights, his eyes looked more vulnerable than ever. You decide. We can separate if you prefer. I can give you money, help you get to Black Creek to find Marta, or... He hesitated. We can go together. Beatrice felt a strange tightness in her chest, a feeling that wasn't exactly fear, nor exactly desire, but something in between. In just a few weeks, her life had completely changed. She had discovered her origins, met a complex and disturbing man who fascinated and frightened her in equal measure, and now she was a fugitive, with a completely uncertain future ahead. Black Creek, she finally decided. Let's go find my mother together. And then, she swallowed hard, then we'll figure out the rest. Thomas nodded, a faint smile curving his lips. Thank you for coming after me, for helping me, even after knowing everything I did. Don't thank me yet, she replied, keeping her eyes on the road. I don't know why I did it. I don't know what I feel for you. Fair enough, he said softly. I don't know what I feel either. I just know that, for the first time in years, I'm feeling something real. Something of my own, not induced by drugs or manipulated by Helena. They drove in silence for some time, each lost in their own thoughts. When they reached the main highway leading out of New Orleans, Beatrice finally asked something that had been bothering her. And Louisa? Helena mentioned a woman named Louisa who ended up in a wheelchair. Thomas visibly tensed. After a long silence, he answered, Louisa Monroe. She was my fiancée for a year before Marta. We had a turbulent relationship. I was possessive, she felt suffocated. He took a deep breath. One night, after a particularly intense fight, she threatened to leave me. I followed her to the stairs, trying to stop her from leaving. There was a push. She felt like Marta. Yes, but in Louisa's case, the injury was permanent. She was left a paraplegic. The pain in his voice was palpable. It was after that I had my first psychotic break. I couldn't handle what I had done. And Helena took control. Exactly. She handled everything, silenced it all, had me discreetly committed, financially compensated Louisa's family. She became my savior and at the same time my jailer. Beatrice absorbed the information in silence. It was a pattern then. Not just an isolated accident with her mother, but repeated behavior. How can I trust that it won't happen again? That you won't lose control with me too? Thomas looked at her with an intensity that made her shiver, even as she kept her eyes on the road. I can't promise I'll never have problems again. I have an obsessive disorder and a tendency for psychotic episodes under extreme stress. It's a condition that needs ongoing treatment. He paused, but now I know what I have. I understand my triggers. I recognize the signs. And more importantly, I don't want to control you, Beatrice. I want to see you free, happy, even if it's far away from me. There was a raw sincerity in his words that touched her deeply. Beatrice didn't answer, but her hand left the steering wheel for a moment and found his in the darkness of the car. A brief, almost hesitant touch, but one that communicated more than words ever could. They spent the night at a roadside motel, careful not to use credit cards or leave a digital trail. Thomas had some cash, enough for 2 simple rooms and a modest meal. Despite her exhaustion, Beatrice took a long time to fall asleep. The adrenaline of the escape, the revelations of the past few days, the unsettling proximity of Thomas in the room next door, it all conspired to keep her awake, thinking, feeling, fearing, desiring. When she finally fell asleep, she dreamed of her mother. Marta was calling to her, arms outstretched in a bookstore filled with light. Behind her, a shadow watched, not threatening but protective. In the dream, Beatrice ran toward them, feeling for the first time that she was going home. The next morning, they resumed their journey. The plan was simple: get to Black Creek, Virginia, find Marta, and together decide on the next step. Beatrice knew, however, that nothing would be truly simple. Helena would certainly not give up. The fortune at stake was too large, and the control she had exerted over Thomas for so many years would not be easily relinquished. "We need to be prepared," Thomas said, as they had coffee at a roadside diner. "Helena will use every resource available to find me. She'll claim I'm dangerous, that I need to be restrained. She's probably already contacted the police. Can we prove she was improperly medicating you? Maybe. Dr. Evans, my official psychiatrist, is practically her employee, but I've been secretly consulting another doctor for the past few months, a specialist in obsessive disorders. He has documented my gradual improvement, the controlled reduction of medication. If we can contact him—" "What's his name?" "Dr. Paul Travers. He has an office in downtown New Orleans." Beatrice made a mental note. "And what about proof against Helena? About the embezzlement from the company you mentioned?" A faint smile curved Thomas's lips. "You think like a strategist. I grew up in an orphanage. I learned to plan for my survival from an early age." Thomas nodded in understanding. "I have some proof. Documents I've been gathering over the last few years, as I've improved. They're in a safe deposit box at a bank under a false name. But we'd have to go back to New Orleans to access them. Too risky right now." "Yes, but there's another option." He hesitated. "Louisa." Beatrice nearly choked on her coffee. "Louisa, the woman you—" "Yes, the last I heard of her, she was living in Richmond. Helena paid her family a small fortune for their silence, but she also monitors her regularly, ensuring she doesn't talk. If we could get to her, tell her our side—" "Why would she help you? After everything?" Thomas looked down. "Maybe she won't. She probably hates me, and rightly so. But Louisa was always fair, even in the worst moments. And she knows Helena as well as I do. She knows what my sister is capable of." Beatrice considered the idea. It was risky, potentially cruel to Louisa, but it could also be their best chance against Helena. "Let's find my mother first," she decided. "Then we'll think about that." Thomas agreed. He finished his coffee and went to pay the bill while Beatrice waited by the car. Watching him from a distance, chatting casually with the waitress, smiling slightly, it was hard to imagine the disturbed man he described himself as having been. There was a natural elegance about him, a restrained intensity that drew glances. Beatrice wondered how many women had been seduced by that same magnetic presence before discovering the shadows he carried. When he returned, their eyes met for a moment. Something silent and electric passed between them, a recognition, an unspoken promise. "Ready?" he asked. Beatrice nodded, getting back into the car. As they got back on the road, she said something she had been thinking. "If we're going to do this together, face Helena, find my mother, rebuild our lives, we need total honesty between us. No more secrets, no more half-truths." Thomas looked at her intently. "I agree. Ask me anything and I promise to answer with the truth. Are you still taking any kind of medication? Something you really need?" "Yes, a mood stabilizer and a low-dose antipsychotic. They're the ones Regina gave you. Without them, I could eventually have episodes of paranoia or exacerbated obsessive behavior. How will I know if you're getting worse?" He thought for a moment. "I start to get more controlling, checking things repeatedly, asking questions about where you've been, who you've spoken to. I might have severe insomnia, become agitated, and," he hesitated, "I might become overly protective, seeing threats where there are none. And what should I do if that happens? Remind me to take the medication. Confront me directly. Don't be afraid to say I'm being irrational. And if it's really serious," he took a deep breath, "leave me. Prioritize your safety." His frankness surprised and moved her. It was rare to find someone so aware of their own flaws, so willing to face them. "My turn," he said. "Why did you really come after me last night? Why didn't you run away alone when you had the chance?" The question caught Beatrice by surprise. She drove in silence for a few moments, organizing her thoughts. "Because I'm not the kind of person who abandons someone in danger," she finally answered. "Because despite everything you've done in the past, I saw how Helena manipulates you, how she abuses her power over you." She paused. "And because there's something between us. Something I can't define yet, that might be wrong, but that is real." Thomas nodded slowly. "I feel it too, and it scares me." "Me too." They continued their journey in a comfortable silence, the road unfolding before them, leading them away from the past and toward an uncertain future, but one that, for the first time in a long time for both of them, seemed to hold the possibility of redemption. As they neared Virginia, the landscape changed. The mountains rose majestically. The air became cooler, the sky bluer. It was as if nature itself reflected the change in their lives, leaving behind the suffocating mansion in New Orleans, with its secrets and manipulations, and heading toward something purer, truer. That night, they stopped at a small inn on the way to Black Creek. For the first time since they met, they ate together without the shadow of the employer-employee hierarchy, without the watchful eyes of Helena or Regina. It was just Beatrice and Thomas, two strangers connected by a painful past and an uncertain present, slowly discovering each other. "How do you imagine the meeting with Marta will be?" he asked as they shared a bottle of cheap wine on the inn's porch, watching the starry sky. Beatrice swirled the liquid in her glass, thoughtful. "Honestly, I don't know. I have so many questions, so much anger mixed with longing. It's confusing. Do you think she'll forgive me?" The vulnerability in his voice touched Beatrice. "I don't know. Maybe it's not about forgiveness. Maybe it's about understanding, about moving forward." Thomas hesitantly reached out, touching Beatrice's face with his fingertips, just as he had the first time they were truly close. This time, however, there was no fear between them. There was tension, yes, and history and complexity, but the fear was giving way to something deeper. "I don't deserve this," he murmured. "I don't deserve this chance." "Maybe it's not about deserving," she replied, not flinching from his touch. "Maybe it's about choosing to be different, to do differently." When their lips finally met, it was as if something that had been contained for too long was finally set free. The kiss began hesitantly, almost chaste but quickly deepened, filled with desire, need, and mutual recognition. They broke apart, breathless, their foreheads still touching. "This is crazy," she whispered. Her eyes closed. "Probably," he agreed, his fingers tangled in her hair. "But for the first time in years, I feel sane." That night, they didn't sleep together. Not completely. There were boundaries they both knew they needed to respect, lines they weren't ready to cross. But the kisses, the touches, the growing intimacy between them marked a point of no return in their shared journey. The next morning, they were back on the road, closer now, but also more aware of the complexities they faced. Helena would certainly not give up, and the meeting with Marta could change everything all over again. "We're almost there," Beatrice said, as they passed the sign indicating Black Creek was just a few miles away. "Are you ready for this?" Thomas looked at her with a mixture of fear and determination. "No, but I'll face it for you, for Marta, for who I want to become." She squeezed his hand briefly, a gesture that said more than words could. Together they drove toward the next chapter of their intertwined lives, a chapter that promised redemption, truth, and perhaps a chance to start over. Black Creek appeared before them like a colonial American painting, streets of uneven cobblestones, historic houses with colorful walls and wooden windows, Baroque churches with gilded details. The small Virginia town, nestled between verdant mountains, seemed to exist in a parallel reality, untouched by the fury and manipulation they had left behind in New Orleans. Beatrice parked the jeep at the edge of town, where vehicle traffic was restricted. From there they would proceed on foot. The fresh air of the Blue Ridge Mountains filled their lungs, bringing with it the scent of fresh bread, newly brewed coffee, and wildflowers. For a moment she felt transported to another time, as if the problems they carried had been left behind on the road. "Do you know exactly where the bookstore is?" Thomas asked, adjusting the backpack on his shoulder, looking around with the expression of someone who fears being recognized at any moment. "According to your information, on Main Street, near the St. Anthony Parish." Beatrice consulted the small map she had printed at their last stop. "It should be about a 15-minute walk from here." They walked through narrow, charming alleys, passing tourists photographing the historic architecture, artisans displaying their work in small shops, and local residents who watched them with the curiosity typical of a small town. Beatrice felt her heart beat faster and faster as they neared the address. She was about to meet her mother, the woman who had left her in an orphanage to protect her, the woman who had suffered at the hands of the man now walking beside her. "You're nervous," Thomas commented. Not as a question, but as a statement. "It's strange. I've spent my whole life wondering who my parents were, fantasizing about finding them one day. And now," she hesitated, "now I'm just minutes away from meeting my mother and I have no idea what to say." Thomas took her hand, squeezing it gently. "Say what's in your heart. She's waited for this moment as much as you have." The New Dawn bookstore appeared at the corner of Main Street and a narrow alley. It was a small but charming establishment, housed on the first floor of a restored colonial building. The facade was a soft sky blue, with the name painted in elegant gold letters above the solid wood door. In the window, carefully arranged books and a small ceramic hummingbird, the same symbol as the keychain Thomas had given her. "This is it," Beatrice murmured, stopping a few feet from the entrance, suddenly feeling paralyzed. Thomas stood beside her. "Do you want me to wait here? Maybe it's better if you go in alone first." Beatrice considered the suggestion. It made sense. Marta's encounter with the man who had hurt her so deeply could be too traumatic as a first interaction after so many years. But something inside her knew they needed to face this together. "No, we go in together. She deserves to see that you've changed, that you're trying to fix things." Beatrice took a deep breath. "But stay a little behind me. Let me speak first." Thomas nodded, his face tense but determined. The bell above the door chimed softly as they entered the bookstore. The interior was even cozier than the facade suggested. Antique wooden shelves filled with well-organized books, a small coffee area with a few round tables at the back. The scent of old books mixed with cinnamon and freshly brewed coffee. Natural light poured in through large windows, creating a warm and almost magical atmosphere. Behind the counter, arranging some newly arrived volumes, was a woman of about 50. Grey hair cut in an elegant bob framed a face that, despite the marks of time, still held a serene beauty. When she looked up at the newcomers, Beatrice felt the air leave her lungs. They were her own eyes reflected in the older woman's, the same almond shape, the same shade of brown, even the slight arch of the eyebrows when surprised. "Can I help you?" The voice was melodious, with a faint New Orleans accent that years in Virginia hadn't completely erased. Beatrice tried to speak, but the words caught in her throat. It was Thomas who stepped forward, positioning himself beside her. "Marta," he said simply. The woman visibly paled, the books in her hands slipping onto the counter with a dull thud. Her eyes widened in shock, first fixed on Thomas, then moving slowly to Beatrice, examining every detail of her face with an almost painful intensity. "Beatrice." The name came out as a trembling whisper, a prayer, a question, and a certainty all at once. Beatrice could only nod, unable to articulate words in the face of the emotion that flooded her. Tears began to stream down Marta's face as she slowly came around the counter, as if afraid the vision before her might vanish at any moment. "My daughter," she whispered, stopping just a step away, her hands outstretched but hesitant, as if she didn't dare to touch. How did you find me?" "I always knew I needed to find you," Beatrice replied, her voice choked with emotion. "And Thomas helped me." At the mention of his name, Marta's eyes hardened. She looked at Thomas with a mixture of fear and anger that made Beatrice shudder. "What do you want?" Marta's voice had lost all its previous softness. "How dare you bring her here?" "After everything." "Mom," Beatrice interrupted, the words sounding strange and yet perfectly natural on her lips. "He's not here to hurt anyone. We're on the run." From Helena. The mention of Thomas's sister's name seemed to hit Marta like a physical shock. She took a step back, looking around as if fearing Helena might materialize at any moment. "You shouldn't have come here," she said, her voice now an urgent whisper. "She'll find you. She always finds you." "We need to talk," Thomas said, maintaining a respectful distance, "but not here, not like this. There's too much at stake." Marta glanced at the bookstore door, then at the clock on the wall. "I close at noon on Saturdays." "Wait an hour. I live in the apartment above the shop. Come through the side entrance in the alley." Lunch in the small living room of Marta's apartment was one of the most surreal experiences of Beatrice's life, sitting at the table with her biological mother and the man who had been responsible for separating them, watching them both try to maintain a tense civility while eating a traditional Southern meal. Collard greens, roasted pork loin, cornbread, was like being in a movie where nothing made sense, and yet where everything finally fell into place. "So you worked at the Our Lady of Angels Institute?" Marta asked, breaking a long silence as she poured more sweet tea. "How did you find out about me?" "An employee named Estelle showed me your note." "The one about never walking again?" Beatrice hesitated. "At the orphanage, she took special care of me. I think she knew who I was." Marta nodded slowly. "Estelle was my only friend there. She was the one who helped me leave you there safely. She promised to look after you until," her voice broke, "until I could come back. But then Helena found me, threatened to expose who I was, to have you transferred somewhere I would never find you." She glanced briefly at Thomas. "I had to disappear completely, change my name, my state, start from scratch. And how did you end up here in Black Creek?" Thomas asked, speaking for the first time since they had started the meal. Marta took a sip of tea before answering, as if needing courage. "I came to Virginia first because it was far from New Orleans, and anonymity was easier in smaller cities. I worked in Richmond for a few years, but I always feared being found. Then 5 years ago, a client at the clinic where I worked as a receptionist offered me a partnership in a small bookstore she was opening here." A faint smile touched her lips. "Books have always been my refuge. It felt right." "You tried to find me recently," Beatrice said. "At the orphanage." Marta's eyes filled with tears. "When I turned 50, I realized I had wasted too much time being afraid. So I decided I had to try at least one more time. So I contacted Estelle." She frowned. "How did you find that out?" Thomas and Beatrice exchanged glances. "Helena intercepted your communication," Thomas explained. "She never stopped monitoring you. And when she learned you were trying to contact Beatrice, she acted first." "By hiring me as a housekeeper at the mansion," Beatrice completed. "As a trap," Marta said, comprehension replacing the confusion on her face. To test Thomas. To see if I would become obsessed again, Thomas confirmed, his face a mask of shame. And to ensure you never reached Beatrice. A heavy silence fell over them. Marta looked at Thomas for a long time, then at Beatrice and back at him. You're different, she said finally. It's not just your appearance. It's something in your eyes. I've been in treatment for years, he replied. Real treatment, not what Helena prescribed to keep me controlled. I've learned to recognize my triggers, to manage my impulses. I still have bad days, I still need medication, but, he hesitated, I'm no longer the man who hurt you, Marta. Why should I believe that? Because he helped me escape, Beatrice interrupted. Because he told me everything, even knowing I might hate him for it. And because, she hesitated looking at Thomas, because he's trying to do the right thing even when it's the hardest. Marta studied her daughter intently. For you care about him. It wasn't a question, but Beatrice answered anyway. It's complicated. There's something between us I can't explain. I know it seems wrong considering everything, but the heart rarely follows logic, Marta completed with a sigh. Believe me, I know that better than anyone. Thomas stood up abruptly, walking to the window that overlooked the historic street below. Helena won't give up, he said, changing the subject. She's probably already alerted the police, claiming I'm unstable, that I've kidnapped Beatrice. She has contacts all over the country. It's only a matter of time before she finds us. What can we do? Beatrice asked. We need proof against her, Thomas replied. Proof that she manipulated my diagnoses, that she embezzled money from the company, that she kept me improperly medicated for years. He turned to Marta. And we need your testimony about how she threatened you, forced you to leave your daughter, to disappear. You're asking me to face Helena? Marta's voice trembled. You don't understand the terror I've lived with all these years. The constant fear that she would find me, that she would do something to Beatrice. Mom, Beatrice said, the word still new on her tongue. I know it's a lot to ask. But if we don't stand up to her, she'll continue to control our lives. Mine, yours, and Thomas's. Marta closed her eyes briefly. I need time to think. All of this. It's too much to process at once. She looked at her daughter with teary eyes. I've barely had time to absorb that I finally found you, that you're here real in front of me after dreaming of this moment for so long. I understand, Thomas said, returning to the table. We can stay in Black Creek for a few days, give you time to reconnect. I have an apartment here not far. Beatrice has the key. You bought an apartment in Black Creek. Marta's tone was incredulous. I knew I would eventually try to find you. I wanted to be prepared. He hesitated. I know it must seem calculating, even obsessive, but the intention was different this time. It was about redemption, not control. Marta studied him for a long time, then said, The first time we met, you seemed intense, magnetic. I felt something I had never felt before. Only later did I understand that intensity wasn't healthy passion, but something darker. She paused. What do you feel for my daughter, Thomas? Is it the same kind of obsession? The question hung in the air like a physical weight. Beatrice felt her face flush, but she kept her eyes on Thomas, equally curious about his answer. What I feel for Beatrice is... He chose his words carefully. Complex. There is attraction, yes, admiration, fascination perhaps, but it's not like before. I don't want to possess her, to control her. I want to see her happy, free, even if that means far away from me. He took a deep breath. The biggest difference is that I now recognize the line between love and obsession, and I am determined not to cross it again. Marta nodded slowly, a slight tremor on her lips. I believe you. God help me, but I believe you. The afternoon passed in a sort of cautious truce. While Marta and Beatrice went downstairs to properly close the bookstore, Thomas remained in the apartment, giving them the space they needed to begin building a relationship that had been brutally interrupted 22 years earlier. In the bookstore, among shelves of novels and history books, mother and daughter began to fill in the gaps of their separate lives. What was your childhood like at the orphanage? Marta asked as she arranged some volumes in the poetry section. Did they treat you well? Beatrice helped, learning the small shop's organizational system. It was lonely for the most part. The nuns were strict but not cruel. Some were even kind in their own way. Estelle was the only one who really showed affection. And school. Did you get to study? Yes. In fact, I graduated with a degree in English literature from Tulane. I got a full scholarship thanks to my grades, but—" She hesitated. "With the economic downturn, I couldn't find a job in my field. That's why I took the job as a housekeeper." The pride on Marta's face was evident. "My daughter with an English degree. I always knew you'd be smart." She smiled, briefly touching Beatrice's face. "When you were a baby, I read to you every night. Poems, fairy tales, anything. You would lie?" So still listening as if you understood every word. "Maybe I did somehow," Beatrice replied, a lump forming in her throat. "Maybe that's why I've always loved literature. It was as if, through books, I could connect with something I had lost." Marta blinked quickly, fighting back tears. "I missed so much of your life. Your first steps, your first words, your birthdays, graduations." "We're together now," Beatrice said, taking her mother's hands. "And we have time to make new memories." When they returned to the apartment, they found Thomas asleep on the sofa, a Gabriel Garcia Marquez book open on his chest. There was something vulnerable about seeing him like this, stripped of the intensity that usually surrounded him. "He needs to rest," Marta whispered. "The medication he takes to control his disorder can be quite sedating." "How do you know that?" Beatrice asked, surprised. "I learned a lot about psychiatric conditions after we separated. I wanted to understand what had happened, what had caused it all." Marta led Beatrice to the small balcony of the apartment, where they could talk without disturbing Thomas. "For years I blamed him exclusively. Then, with time and more knowledge, I understood that Thomas was also a victim in a way, a victim of his own mind, of Helena, of a dysfunctional upbringing. That doesn't justify what he did. No, it doesn't justify it. But it helps to explain it." Marta looked out at the mountainous landscape surrounding Black Creek. "Did you know he had a terrible childhood? His father was a monster, abusive and controlling. His mother, submissive and unable to protect her children. Helena developed her own way of surviving, by becoming calculating, manipulative. Thomas internalized the trauma differently, developing obsessive patterns of behavior, fixating on relationships, needing control." "How do you know all this?" "He told me during the months we were together. And even after, I researched. I wanted to understand." Marta turned to her daughter. "This doesn't mean I've forgiven him for what he did. It just means I understand it better now." Beatrice absorbed the words in silence, looking down at the historic town below, the lights beginning to come on as dusk approached. "What happens now?" she finally asked. "Now," Marta replied, "we need to decide if we're going to face Helena or keep running, because standing still is not an option." The next morning, Thomas took Beatrice to see the apartment he had bought in Black Creek. It was a small but elegant space, located in a restored townhouse a few blocks from Marta's bookstore. The furniture was simple and functional, without the ostentatious luxury of the New Orleans mansion, but with a touch of good taste that showed Thomas's hand in the selection. "I bought it 2 years ago," he explained as he opened the windows to air out the place, which had been closed for months. "When I really started to get better, to reduce the excessive medication Helena was giving me. It was my first truly independent decision in years." "Why Black Creek?" Beatrice asked, exploring the compact but cozy space, admiring the view of the mountains from the small balcony. "Because I found out Marta was here. Because I wanted to be close, in case I ever gathered the courage to apologize in person." He adjusted a photograph on the wall, a black and white image of the local parish church. "And because this place reminded me of something simpler, purer. Far from the world the Hawthorns built." Beatrice moved closer to him, watching his profile against the morning light. "You've really changed, haven't you?" Thomas turned to her, his eyes reflecting a mix of hope and fear. "I'm trying, every day, but make no mistake, I still have my demons. I still fight impulses I don't fully understand. The difference is that now I recognize when I'm slipping. I know when I need to step back, breathe, seek help. And now? How do you feel now about me?" The question hung between them, laden with unspoken meanings. Thomas closed his eyes briefly, as if gathering courage. "I feel something that scares me and strengthens me at the same time, something that feels like both fate and choice." He took a step toward her, lightly touching her face. "But I also know the timing is terrible. That there are too many complications, too much history between us, that you've just found your mother and are processing all of this." His hand dropped. "I don't want to pressure you. I don't want to be another burden, another complication. Beatrice took his hand, holding it firmly. You're not a burden. It's complicated, yes. Maybe even wrong, considering everything. But it's real, and after a lifetime of not knowing who I was, without any true connections, I value what is real, even when it's difficult. The kiss that followed was different from the previous ones. There was no urgency of escape, no adrenaline of imminent danger. It was deeper, more deliberate, a silent commitment to face whatever came, together. They were interrupted by Beatrice's cell phone ringing, a prepaid phone they had bought on the road precisely to communicate without leaving a digital trail. It was Marta. Her voice sounded tense, urgent. You need to come back now. I just had a visitor. From Louisa. Louisa Monroe waited in the living room of Marta's apartment, sitting rigidly in her wheelchair, her hands folded in her lap. At 45, she maintained an austere beauty, framed by brown hair cut in a straight bob and penetrating dark eyes. She was dressed in simple elegance, dress pants, a silk blouse, a small silver brooch on the lapel of her light jacket. When Thomas entered the room, closely followed by Beatrice, the atmosphere seemed to freeze. Louisa slowly raised her gaze, her face a mask of almost perfect control, except for a slight tremor at the corner of her lips. Thomas, she said, her voice firm. You look well, better than I expected. Louisa, he replied, visibly pale. How did you find me? Helena called me, she answered simply. She said you had run away, that you were out of control again, that you had manipulated a vulnerable young woman. Her eyes moved to Beatrice. I presume that's you. I'm Beatrice, she confirmed, standing by Thomas's side, Marta's daughter. Louisa's eyes widened slightly, a flash of surprise breaking her composure. Marta's daughter. Interesting. She looked at Marta, who remained tense by the window. Helena didn't mention that detail. Helena only mentions what's convenient for her, Thomas said, still not moving from the entrance of the room. I assume she asked you to convince me to come back. Or perhaps to report me to the police. Actually, Louisa replied, adjusting the position of her chair to face him better. She offered a considerable sum for me to find you and inform her of your whereabouts, without her direct involvement, and you came to do just that. A faint smile curved Louisa's lips. I came because I wanted to see with my own eyes. Helena said you had stopped taking your medication, that you were obsessive again, that you were a danger. But I've known Helena long enough to know she rarely tells the whole truth. She paused. And I know you, Thomas. Despite everything. Marta finally approached, offering cups of coffee she had prepared. Louisa told us you two kept in touch over the years. Thomas looked surprised. Kept in touch. But Helena said a lot of things, Louisa interrupted, accepting a cup with a nod of thanks to Marta. She wanted me to hate you, to become a constant reminder of your failure, your guilt. But life is more complicated than that. Beatrice and Thomas finally sat down, absorbing the unexpected presence of this woman who represented so much of his turbulent past. Why did you really come, Louisa? Beatrice asked directly. Louisa studied her with approval. Direct, I like that. She took a sip of coffee before continuing. I came because after Helena called me, I realized this was the opportunity I had been waiting for years. The chance to finally free Thomas from her. To end the control she exerts not only over him but over all of us. How? Thomas asked, visibly confused. With the truth, Thomas. The whole truth. Louisa placed her cup on the coffee table. Helena didn't just manipulate your diagnoses and medication over the years. She actively sabotaged your recovery every time you showed signs of improvement. I already suspected that, he said. But how do you know? Because she paid me to be her informant, to report any contact you tried to make with me, any sign that you were becoming more independent. Louisa didn't look away, facing the expression of betrayal forming on Thomas's face. At first I accepted out of fear and for revenge. Later I continued because I realized I could gather evidence against her. What kind of evidence? Beatrice asked, leaning forward, suddenly hopeful. Louisa opened the elegant handbag she carried and took out a flash drive. Recordings of conversations, emails, records of financial transfers, falsified medical reports, statements from Dr. Evans admitting he signed reports without properly examining you. She held the flash drive out to Thomas. Everything you need to sue her for medical fraud abuse of power as a legal trustee, and embezzlement from the company. Thomas looked at the small object as if it were a bomb about to explode. "Why now, Louisa? Why not before?" Because you weren't ready before." Her eyes softened slightly. "You were as trapped in your own mind as you were in her control. You needed to reach a point where you could fight for yourself." She glanced briefly at Beatrice. "And you needed a reason strong enough to face not just Helena, but your own demons." "I hurt you," Thomas said. His voice choked. "I put you in this chair. How can you want to help me after that?" Louisa sighed deeply. "What happened between us was complex, Thomas. Yes, you pushed me during an argument. Yes, the fall left me a paraplegic. But before that, our relationship was already toxic, on both sides." She adjusted her position in the chair. "I manipulated you too. I provoked you, knowing exactly which buttons to push to destabilize you. I was not a passive victim. That doesn't justify—" "No, it doesn't justify it," she interrupted. "Nothing justifies physical violence. But the narrative Helena created of the monster and the innocent victim only served her purposes. The reality was grayer. Marta, who had remained silent, finally spoke. Helena did the same to me. She painted me as an opportunist who had seduced a vulnerable man. She made me feel guilty for what happened, as if I had somehow provoked the situation. Classic Helena, Louisa said with bitterness. She's a master at twisting narratives, at making victims question their own perception of reality. Gaslighting, Beatrice murmured. Psychological manipulation. Exactly. Louisa looked at Thomas again. Thomas, you have a real mental condition, obsessive disorder, tendencies for psychotic episodes under extreme stress. That is true and requires ongoing treatment. But Helena turned your condition into a weapon against you, against anyone who threatened her control. Thomas finally took the flash drive, holding it as if it weighed tons. What do we do with this now? Now, Louisa said with a faint smile, we begin to dismantle the empire Helena built on your fragility, and we give you back control of your life. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of activity. The contents of Louisa's flash drive proved to be even more incriminating than they had expected. In addition to the evidence against Helena, there were documents showing she had blackmailed members of the Hawthorne Corporation's board, forged Thomas's signatures on multi-million-dollar contracts, and systematically alienated family properties for her own benefit. With the help of a trusted lawyer of Louisa's, who came discreetly to Black Creek, they began to prepare a comprehensive lawsuit against Helena for medical fraud, abuse of power as a legal trustee, and corporate embezzlement. It won't be an easy battle, warned Mr. Renato Vasconcelos, a middle-aged man with a serious demeanor and shrewd eyes behind thin-framed glasses. Helena has powerful connections, but the evidence is substantial. And with the combined testimonies of Marta, Louisa, and you, Thomas, we have a solid case. How long will it take? Beatrice asked, concerned about the answer. To remove Helena from Thomas's legal trusteeship? Possibly a few weeks, if we act quickly with an emergency injunction. To fully resolve the criminal and corporate issues? Months, maybe a year. It doesn't matter how long it takes, Thomas said, determination clear in his voice. The important thing is that she can no longer control any of us. On the afternoon of the third day after Louisa's arrival, as they were finalizing the documents to file with the court, the inevitable happened. A black luxury car parked on the narrow street in front of Marta's bookstore, and Helena Hawthorne emerged from it, impeccable in her grey suit, accompanied by two intimidating-looking men. From the apartment above the bookstore, they watched her arrival through the curtains. How did she find us? Marta whispered, her face pale. She probably followed Louisa, Thomas replied, or had someone following her. Louisa adjusted the position of her chair. It was inevitable. In fact, I'm surprised it took this long. What do we do now? Beatrice asked, watching Helena enter the empty bookstore. Marta had put the closed sign on the door earlier. Now, said Mr. Vasconcelos, calmly placing the documents in his briefcase, we face the confrontation that was destined to happen. But on our terms, not hers. It was Thomas who took the initiative. He went downstairs first, followed by Beatrice. Marta hesitated briefly, but joined them, while Louisa and the lawyer remained in the apartment. Their presence would be a tactical surprise for the right moment. Helena was examining the bookshelves when they entered the shop. feigning interest in the displayed literature. Upon seeing them, a cold smile curved her lips. "What a touching reunion," she said, placing a book back on the shelf. "The family finally reunited. You just needed to invite your father, Beatrice, to complete the melodrama." Beatrice felt her blood run cold. "My father?" "Helena, that's enough," Thomas interrupted, stepping slightly in front of Beatrice and Marta. "It's over. We know everything you've done. We have proof." Helena laughed, a humorless sound that echoed through the empty bookstore. "Proof? Of what exactly, little brother? Of taking care of you when no one else could stand your breakdowns? Of protecting the family company while you were mentally incapacitated? Of keeping your dirty secrets out of the press? Of manipulating me," he replied, his voice firm. "Of falsifying medical reports, keeping me sedated beyond what was necessary, embezzling millions from the company, and using my condition to maintain control over everything." Helena's expression hardened. "You're delusional again. This is exactly why I came to get you. You've clearly stopped taking your medication." "He's still taking the proper medication," Beatrice said, stepping forward. "Not the chemical cocktails you prescribed to keep him submissive." Helena studied her with disdain. The little housekeeper fell in love with the rich, disturbed boss. How cliché. Her gaze shifted to Marta. "Like mother, like daughter, it seems." "It won't work this time, Helena," Marta said, her voice trembling but determined. "We won't let you manipulate us again." "Fine words," Helena replied, making a discreet gesture to the two men accompanying her, who began to position themselves strategically in the shop. "But the reality is that Thomas will come with me now, willingly or not. I have a court order declaring he is a danger to himself and others." "That order was obtained based on false information," said a new voice. Helena turned sharply to see Luisa entering the bookstore, followed by Mr. Vasconcelos. "Luisa," she said, visibly shocked. You're with them." "I'm with the truth, Helena." Luisa maneuvered her wheelchair to be beside Thomas. "It's over. All your lies, manipulations, crimes. Everything is documented and will be presented to a judge later today." Helena visibly paled but quickly regained her composure. "Lies invented by a mentally unstable man and resentful women. No one will believe you." "The court will believe the evidence," said Mr. Vasconcelos, introducing himself formally. "I am Renato Vasconcelos, attorney for Mr. Thomas Hawthorne. And this," he took an envelope from his inner jacket pocket, "is an emergency injunction removing Ms. Helena Hawthorne from the legal trusteeship of my client, effective immediately." Helena took the document with trembling hands, her eyes quickly scanning its contents. When she looked up again, there was something dangerous in her eyes, the desperation of someone cornered. "This means nothing," she said, tearing the paper to pieces. "I have doctors who will attest to Thomas's instability. I have proof that he's dangerous. And I have," she looked directly at Beatrice, "the power to destroy all of you." "No, Helena," Thomas replied calmly. "The only power you have is what we allow you to have. And we won't allow it anymore." It was at that moment that one of the men with Helena made a sudden move toward Thomas. Beatrice reacted instinctively, placing herself between them. The man shoved her hard, causing her to fall against a bookshelf that partially collapsed. What followed was chaos. Thomas lunged to protect Beatrice, while Marta screamed for help. The second man tried to restrain Thomas, but was surprised when Luisa deliberately rammed her wheelchair into his legs, unbalancing him. Mr. Vasconcelos had discreetly called the local police as soon as they saw Helena arrive. Hand officers entered the bookstore just as the situation threatened to escalate into real violence. "What's going on here?" asked Sergeant Miller, a burly middle-aged man with a grey mustache, clearly unaccustomed to such disturbances in his quiet, historic town. "These men attacked us," Marta replied quickly. "And this woman," she pointed to Helena, "is trying to force my friend to go with her against his will." "That's ridiculous," Helena protested. "I am a doctor and the legal trustee of this man who suffers from a severe mental disorder. I am trying to take him back for treatment." Mr. Vasconcelos intervened, presenting a copy of the injunction. "This court order, Sergeant, invalidates any authority Dr. Hawthorne claims to have over my client." The sergeant examined the document carefully, then looked at the group before him, Helena furious, Thomas determined, Beatrice still recovering from her fall, Marta protective, Louisa composed in her wheelchair, and the two men clearly embarrassed at being caught in the act. "Well," he said finally, "it seems we have a complicated situation here. I suggest you all accompany me to the station for clarification." He looked specifically at Helena's two men. "Especially you two, to explain why you were assaulting these people." Helena knew she had lost, at least this battle. With an icy glare at the group, especially Thomas, she said, "This isn't over. You know that, don't you? Without me, you'll go back to being the monster you truly are. And this time she'll be the one to pay the price." Her gaze fixed on Beatrice. "The only monstrosity here," Thomas replied calmly, "is what you've done to all of us in the name of power and money. And that ends today." The following weeks were intense. The legal battle against Helena was just beginning. She had hired a team of elite lawyers and was fighting fiercely to maintain control of the company and regain trusteeship of Thomas. But with the evidence provided by Louisa and the combined testimonies of Thomas, Marta, and an independent psychiatrist who attested to Thomas's current stability with the correct treatment, they had the upper hand. While the case proceeded, Beatrice, Thomas, and Marta established a new routine in Black Creek. Beatrice began working at the bookstore with her mother, discovering a passion for literary curation and customer interaction. Thomas, free for the first time in years to make his own decisions, divided his time between remote consultations with his new psychiatrist and projects restoring antique furniture, a therapeutic hobby he had recently discovered. The relationship between mother and daughter blossomed day by day. Every conversation revealed more similarities, more connections, more pieces of the puzzle of their identities. For Beatrice, it was like finally finding the mirror that had always been missing from her life. For Marta, it was the chance to heal the wound that had bled silently for 22 years. And then there were Thomas and Beatrice. What had begun in such unlikely circumstances, he as the tormented boss, she as the investigative employee, had transformed into something deep and unexpected. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was complex, sometimes difficult, laden with history and complications. But it was also real, based on conscious choice and mutual understanding, not on manipulation or obsession. On a golden autumn afternoon, about 2 months after the confrontation with Helena, Thomas invited Beatrice for a walk through the historic town. They walked hand in hand through the cobblestone streets, stopping occasionally to admire the colonial architecture or buy local crafts. "I heard from Mr. Vasconcelos today," Thomas said as they sat on a bench in the town square, watching the quiet bustle of the town. "The judge has rejected Helena's final appeal. The decision to permanently remove me from her legal trusteeship stands." "That's wonderful," Beatrice exclaimed, squeezing his hand. "And what about the company?" "It's still in dispute, but the outlook is good. With the evidence of embezzlement, she will likely face criminal charges." He sighed deeply. "It's strange. On one hand, I feel relief. On the other, sadness. She is my sister, after all. At some point before all this, we loved each other, in our own twisted way." Beatrice rested her head on his shoulder. "Families are complicated, especially broken ones." "Speaking of family," Thomas hesitated, "there's something I've been meaning to ask you. About what Helena said that day in the bookstore." "About my father?" "Yes." He turned to face her. "Do you want to know who he is?" "I could probably find out." "I have resources, contacts." Beatrice thought for a long moment. "You know, when I was a child in the orphanage, I dreamed about it constantly. I imagined my father as an absent hero, someone who would come to rescue me one day." She smiled softly. "Now that I've found my mother, that I've discovered the truth about my past, I realize that maybe some questions don't need to be answered." "Are you sure?" "For now, yes. I have you. I have my mother. I'm building a life that finally feels authentic. The rest can wait." Thomas touched her face gently. "You're extraordinary, you know that. After everything you've been through, everything you've discovered about me, about your past, most people would have broken. Or run away. Maybe I'm stronger than I look." "There's no maybe about it," he replied, smiling. "You are the strongest person I've ever met." The kiss they shared tasted of promise, not the fairy tale kind, but the real kind, one that acknowledges there will be difficult days, that the past never completely disappears, that true love isn't perfect, but is consciously chosen every day. That evening, when they returned to the small apartment above the bookstore, where Beatrice now lived with Marta, they found a surprise. Louisa had returned to Black Creek for a visit, bringing news from Richmond and the progress of the cases against Helena. The four of them had dinner together at the small kitchen table: Marta, Beatrice, Thomas, and Louisa, an unlikely gathering of people connected by pain, betrayal, and finally redemption. "To the new family we've formed," Louisa toasted, raising her wineglass, "not by blood or obligation, but by choice." "To choosing to start over," Marta added, looking lovingly at her daughter. "To choosing to be better than our past," Thomas said, his eyes meeting Beatrice's. "To choosing love, even when it's the hardest path," Beatrice completed, returning his gaze with equal intensity. The next morning, as the sun rose over the Virginia mountains, Beatrice went out silently onto the small apartment balcony. Marta found her there minutes later, offering a cup of coffee. "What are you thinking about so early?" her mother asked, joining her in contemplating the historic town as it slowly woke. "About how unpredictable life is," Beatrice replied. "A few months ago I was an orphan with no past, working as a housekeeper in a mansion haunted by secrets. Now," she made a sweeping gesture, "I have a mother, Thomas, a home." Marta smiled, putting an arm around her daughter's shoulders. "And I have my daughter back, after all these years believing I had lost you forever. Do you think it will work out? Between Thomas and me?" Marta considered the question seriously. "Love never comes with guarantees, sweetheart. Especially a love with roots as complex as yours," she paused. "But I see how he looks at you, not with obsession, but with admiration. I see how he fights every day to be better, not just for you, but for himself. And I see how you accept him, not blindly, but with your eyes wide open to who he is, flaws and all." "I'm scared sometimes," Beatrice confessed, "that one day he might go back to how he was, that we might repeat the cycle you lived through." "Fear is healthy in moderate doses. It keeps you vigilant, aware." Marta squeezed her daughter's shoulder. "But don't let fear stop you from living, from loving." "I did for many years. I lost so much time." Beatrice hugged her mother, feeling the familiar fragrance of old books and lavender that she now associated with her new concept of home. Later that day, while organizing a new shipment of books in the bookstore, Beatrice heard the door chime. It was Thomas carrying a small package. "I brought something for you," he said, holding out the package. "Actually, for the three of us." Intrigued, Beatrice opened the wrapping to reveal 3 small, hand-painted ceramic hummingbirds, each unique in its design and colors, but clearly part of a set. "They're beautiful," she said, touching one of the delicate birds. "I commissioned them from a local artisan. They symbolize you, Marta, and me. Different, marked by distinct experiences, yet connected." He seemed almost shy, a striking contrast to the intimidating man she had met months before. "I thought we could hang them here in the bookstore, as a reminder." "A reminder of what?" "That even the darkest stories can have new chapters. That people can change, heal, start over." He took her hand. "That real love doesn't possess, doesn't control. It liberates." Beatrice looked at the small, colorful birds, symbols of both fragility and strength, just like the people they represented. She thought of everything they had been through, the pain, the secrets, the revelations, the struggle, and what they would still face, the legal proceedings against Helena, Thomas's ongoing work on his mental health, the day-by-day building of a relationship with her mother, the development of whatever this intense and transformative thing was between her and Thomas. It wouldn't be an easy path. It wouldn't be a fairy tale. But it would be real, it would be theirs, and it would be consciously chosen every day. "Perfect," she said, standing on her toes to kiss him softly. "A new chapter, for all of us." In the